All right. So we all know what it looks like when a student is doing well in school,
Right.
right? Good grades, they get into the college, they want maybe even win some awards.
Yeah.
But how much of that success is really because of what happens in the classroom? I mean, versus like
Right.
what's going on in their lives outside of school. Is it a level playing field, or do some kids get like
Yeah.
a big head start based on their family background?
That is a huge question, isn't it? When we see kids succeeding academically, it makes sense to look beyond just,
Yeah.
their hard work at school. What about that bigger picture? What's their environment like?
Exactly. And that's what we're diving into today.
Yeah.
The connection between family, socioeconomic status,
Uh-huh.
that's often called SES, and how well students do academically in mainland China.
Okay.
So,
And what's particularly interesting here is that we're not just looking at one study. This is a meta-analysis,
Right.
which is basically a study of
Right.
studies, right? It takes a whole bunch of research projects and puts all those findings together.
yeah.
And in this case, we've got 78 independent samples. That's data from over 215,000 students
Wow.
all across basic education. So we're talking kindergarten all the way through high school, though not including vocational schools.
That's a pretty massive scope.
Yeah.
And it covers a lot of time too,
Yeah.
right? Like January 1979 to May 2017.
Yeah.
So for all of you learners out there,
Yeah.
today, we're going to pull out the most important insights from all this research,
Yeah.
what really jumps out at us, the surprising stuff,
Exactly.
and we'll try to avoid getting lost in all that academic jargon.
Yeah, our goal is to really give you a clear picture of what this huge collection of research tells us about this important relationship between,
Right.
family background and academic achievement.
Okay. So to really get why these findings matter, we got to understand the whole context of China. Right. I mean, it is the world's most populous developing country.
Right.
It's got its own very unique culture and a whole different education system.
Absolutely. So you've got this unified school system that's managed by the Ministry of Education.
Right.
And when it comes to paying for education, it's a shared responsibility between the national government and the local authorities.
Okay.
And on top of that, over the past few decades, China has gone through some pretty huge socioeconomic changes, like massive GDP growth, but also a widening income gap. More and more people getting educated and shifts in what kinds of jobs are out there.
It's a very dynamic place. So with all that in mind, there are a couple of key questions we're going to try to answer for you learners. First, what's the overall connection between a family's socioeconomic status
Right.
and how well their kids do in school in mainland China? And second, do things like when the study was done,
Right.
what grade the student was in, how they actually measured SES, and even what subject they were looking at. Do those things affect that relationship?
Yeah, those are really the angles we're going to be exploring in this research.
Okay, so first big question, the overall connection. What did this meta-analysis find when they look at all the data together?
The big takeaway they call a moderate positive correlation between a family's SES and their kids' academic achievement.
Okay.
Statistically speaking, this is shown by a correlation coefficient that's called R of 0.243.
Okay. Moderate correlation. So like if someone's listening, what does that actually mean?
Yeah.
Does that mean if your family has a higher SES, you're automatically going to succeed in school?
No, not necessarily. It's not a guarantee of success just
No.
because your family has a higher SES, but it's definitely more than just a random link, right? It means that family background does play a noticeable role, but it's not the only thing determining how a student's going to do. There's still individual effort and a bunch of other influences at play.
Like one piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. It shows that family SES is a factor, but for sure not the only one.
Yeah.
There are other elements that really contribute significantly to a student's success.
Right.
Okay.
And so this is where things get interesting. The researchers compared this finding to the PG 2015 results specifically for those super developed regions in China, Beijing, Shanghai, Jiangsu, and Guangdong,
Right.
often called BSJG.
Uh-huh.
And those results showed an even stronger relationship in an R of around 0.42.
Wow.
So what could be the reason for this difference? Is it possible that in wealthier areas, those advantages that come with a higher SES get amplified? So even with national efforts to make things equal, could there be bigger gaps in those regions?
That's a really good point. The researchers think that these BSJG regions being more economically developed
Yeah.
might actually have more pronounced educational stratification. Even with those government programs,
Right.
Think about it in wealthier places, the resources and opportunities that come with a higher SES, like access to fancy tutoring
Yeah.
or those enrichment programs, they could have a much bigger impact.
Okay, so it's almost like in these richer areas, the starting line for students from different backgrounds is not really that even.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And the researchers emphasize that this meta-analysis covers 6 regions across mainland China,
Right.
both urban and rural areas. So it gives us a broader and maybe even more accurate picture of the whole country,
Yeah.
kind of smoothing out those regional differences.
That makes sense. A wider lens can definitely show a more realistic view than just focusing on the most developed places.
Right.
Okay, so we talked about the overall connection. Now let's look at the time factor. Did the year a study was done have any effect on this whole SES and academic achievement relationship?
This is where the research gets really surprising. The meta-analysis found a pretty big trend. The relationship between SES and achievement actually got weaker
Oh, wow.
over the past few decades, specifically from 1989 to 2016.
That's good news, right? What could explain this change?
The researchers connect this to modernization theory. The basic idea is that as a society gets more advanced and open, an individual's success in school
Right.
becomes less tied to their family's socioeconomic background. Things like industrialization. Yeah.
More educational opportunities and social support systems can all help reduce those inequalities.
So as China's economy has grown and hopefully opportunities have become more available to a wider range of people, family background has become a little less of a predictor of how a student's going to do in school.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
And the researchers point to a few specific government policies that have probably played a big part in this positive trend.
Okay, so what are some of those policies? What has the Chinese government done that could have helped level the playing field?
A major one is expanding compulsory education, which started back in 1986. This made sure that more kids, regardless of their family's SES, had access to at least basic schooling.
That makes sense. If education becomes a right for everyone, then SES should theoretically become less of an obstacle.
You got it. And they didn't stop there. They also implemented some big financial aid programs.
Okay.
These include things like reducing or even waiving tuition and fees,
Wow.
free textbooks, and hardship allowances. At first, these were mostly for rural areas, starting in 2007.
Okay.
But then they expanded it to low SES families in urban areas, too, in 2008.
That's great.
And get this, since 2011, rural schools have been providing free lunches.
Those are some real concrete steps to make education more affordable for families struggling financially.
Absolutely. They also made changes to how education is funded.
Okay.
The responsibility for planning where those education funds go shifted from the township level to the county level in 2001.
Okay.
And then up to the provincial level in 2006. The idea was to give more support to less developed regions that might have had trouble funding education on their own.
So it's a more centralized approach to make sure resources are spread out fairly across different areas.
Exactly. And there's been a huge increase in how much the government invests in education overall. They hit their goal of spending 4% of GDP on education back in 2012, and they've kept it up since then with a big focus on compulsory education and those less developed regions.
That's a serious financial commitment. It is. Last but not least, they've also got policies to encourage near-school enrollment, especially in big cities.
What does that mean?
It's all about giving everyone equal access to good schools. They're trying to make things fairer, so where you live doesn't determine the quality of education your kid gets.
Got it.
Beijing is a great example. They've got all these measures in place, like really carefully checking enrollment documents, randomly assigning students to schools, and doing thorough information reviews.
Sounds pretty thorough.
It is. It's like a whole bunch of strategies to tackle educational inequality from every angle.
It sounds like a very deliberate and multifaceted approach to try to loosen that link between a child's family background and their educational opportunities.
Yeah, definitely. Now, the researchers do know about reproduction theory, which says that inequality can pass down through generations.
Right.
But what they found in China seems to fit more with modernization theory, probably because of all these proactive government interventions. It suggests that while a perfectly level playing field might still be a work in progress, these efforts are actually making a difference in reducing the influence of family SES on educational outcomes in China, which is pretty positive.
Yeah, definitely encouraging to see those policy efforts might be working.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to another factor, the student's grade level. Does the impact of SES change as students move through their schooling?
That's an interesting one. The meta-analysis found that grade level, whether a student was in primary school or younger middle school or high school,
Yeah.
didn't really change the relationship between SCS and academic achievement.
That's kind of surprising. I would have thought that the influence of the home environment would be stronger in those early years.
Right, and that brings up the compensatory hypothesis of education.
Okay.
The idea is that the impact of SES might actually lessen as kids spend more time in school
Uh-huh.
with the school environment, kind of making up for some of the disadvantages of coming from a lower SES background.
So the school can act as a sort of equalizer, especially as kids get older.
That's the idea. Now, the fact that this study didn't find grade level to be a big factor could mean that schools in mainland China are helping reduce achievement gaps pretty consistently right from the start of formal education.
Right.
It implies that the system is providing a basic level support that stops those gaps from getting bigger as students move up.
So it's not that the influence of SES just disappears as kids get older. It's more like the school system is always working to counter those initial inequalities.
Exactly. The researchers say this finding shows how important it is to keep making schools better at all levels, especially early childhood education,
Hmm.
and to make sure resources are shared fairly for students from all backgrounds. Plus, we got to focus on keeping teachers great throughout the system.
Right.
If we want to stop those SES-related gaps from widening as students move up,
Yeah.
consistent support at every stage of education is super important.
That makes a lot of sense. Consistent support is key to maintaining progress. All right, next up, they looked at how SES was measured in all these different studies. What do they find there?
This is a super important point when we're talking about research methods. You see, SES is a pretty complex concept.
Right.
And the researchers in these studies use a bunch of different things to measure it.
Okay.
They looked at stuff like how much education the parents had their jobs, the family's income, the resources they had at home, like books or computers,
Yeah.
and even combined SES indexes that put a few of these things together.
So a lot of different ways to figure out a family's socioeconomic status. Did the specific way they measured SES change how strong the relationship was with academic achievement in this meta-analysis?
Surprisingly, no. The meta-analysis showed that the type of SES measure didn't really change the connection they saw with achievement in China.
Interesting. Especially because in some Western countries, different measures like income versus parental education can sometimes show different patterns in how they relate to academic outcomes.
That's true. The researchers have a few ideas about why this finding in China is a little different. One possibility is that while parents are getting more education overall, the levels might still be within a range where they don't create huge differences in academic outcomes.
Right.
They even compared stats on higher education between China and the USA to show this.
Okay.
It seems like the spread of higher education might still be developing in a way that doesn't automatically mean big differences in academic results based only on how much education the parents have.
So if a lot of parents across different socioeconomic groups have, let's say, a high school education, that might not be as strong a differentiating factor as it would be in a place where education levels are much more diverse.
Exactly. Another thing they point out is that the link between jobs and income might be more complicated in China.
Yeah.
This is because of some unique historical stuff like the Danwei system, basically work units,
Okay.
and the hukou, which is the household registration system. These systems have shaped social mobility and economic opportunities in ways that might not be totally captured by standard measures of occupation and income.
So it's not always a straightforward connection between what you do and how much you earn.
It's not as clear-cut an indicator of SES as it might be in other systems.
Okay, so those traditional SES indicators might not tell the whole story in China because of these unique historical and institutional factors.
Exactly. They also mentioned that there have been different ways of classifying job status in Chinese research,
Oh.
sometimes using international systems and sometimes using revised systems specific to China,
Okay.
which could also be a reason for this finding of no significant difference based on the SES measure.
That makes sense.
Ultimately, they say we need more research to really figure out the best way to define and measure SES in China.
That makes sense. Different cultures might need different measurement tools.
All right, so the last factor they looked at was this specific subject. Did SES have a different impact depending on whether it was language skills, math, or science?
Yes, this is where things get really specific. The meta-analysis found that SES has a stronger correlation with language achievement. That's both Chinese and English skills.
Compared to achievement in science, math, or even overall academic performance.
That's really interesting. Why would a student's family background play a bigger role in their language development than in subjects like math and science?
Researchers think that early language development depends a lot on the home environment. The the resources available, and how involved the parents are.
Right?
Things like having books around parents reading with their kids and just overall early exposure to language are super important.
It makes sense.
They specifically suggest that higher SES families might be able to give their kids an advantage in Chinese reading and English learning maybe because they have more learning materials, can afford private tutors, or offer other enriching experiences.
So those early years and how rich the language environment is at home can really set kids on different paths when it comes to how well they do with language.
Exactly. On the other hand, they suggest that doing well in science and math might depend more on what's taught in school and the resources the school provides.
Okay.
This could mean that the playing field is a bit more level in those subjects.
So the quality of teaching and the resources at school might matter more for STEM subjects, which could lessen the impact of those differences in home SES.
Exactly. They also point out that general academic achievement scores, which often combine results from lots of subjects, might actually hide these individual relationships that we see when we look at language and science math separately.
Makes sense. Looking at specific subjects gives a clearer picture of where SES really makes a difference. So what does this stronger link between SES and language skills mean in the bigger picture?
The researchers think that making more public resources available for language learning could really help make things more equal.
Like what kinds of resources?
Things like accessible reading programs, well-funded libraries,
Ah,
museums with educational language exhibits, and even free or low-cost language classes.
right.
By making these resources available to everyone, we could help close some of those early language gaps that are influenced by family background.
That makes a lot of sense. If those basic language skills are so important for doing well in school overall, and they're more affected by what happens at home, then providing strong support outside the home could be a huge way to create more educational equity.
You got it.
All right, let's do a quick recap of the key takeaways for you. Learners from our deep dive into the relationship between family SES and academic achievement in mainland China.
Okay, so the main finding is that there's a moderate positive correlation between a student's family background and how they do academically.
Hmm.
But here's the good news, that connection has been getting weaker over time, and it seems like that's because of the different policies the Chinese government has put in place to make education more fair.
Right.
We also saw that SES seems to matter more for language skills, both Chinese and English, than for science and math.
Yeah.
And finally, the research suggests that schools in mainland China might be doing a good job of closing those SES-related achievement gaps pretty early on in a kid's education.
It's really interesting to see how a student's background and their educational success are connected, especially in a country that's changing so quickly.
Yeah.
It shows how dynamic this relationship is and how policies can actually make a difference.
Yeah.
And it leaves me with one final thought for you learners to think about. While it's great to see that these policies promoting educational equity seem to be working, the fact that SES is still strongly linked to language skills means that those differences in early learning environments at home might still be a big hurdle.
Yeah.
So what new and creative strategies could we come up with to make sure that all children, no matter their family's socioeconomic situation,
Right.
have an equal chance to develop strong language skills? It's something to really consider.
That's such an important question, and it shows that we need to keep thinking carefully and taking action to truly make education fair for everyone.
Absolutely. And for those of you listening who want to learn more, we encourage you to think about these findings and maybe even look into some of the specific education policies we talked about.
Yeah.
It could also be helpful to compare what's happening in China with what you see in other countries or contexts that you're familiar with. There's always something new to learn and different perspectives to consider.
Definitely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you learned something new about this important topic.
Thanks for having me.
All right, that's it for today.
See ya.
We'll catch you next time.
Bye.